What is up, fellow sickos? I'm Dan Favale coming at you without my co-host Grant Hughes this time, but I'm super excited to be joined by a first-time guest, Mr. Yossi Goslin of the Third Apron. Has absolutely been crushing um, just all his coverage, but this offseason specifically, the graphics you put out of every team's cap situation helps idiots like me keep track of everything in real time. So we super appreciate those resources. Go check him out. His links will be after this in the podcast and YouTube descriptions, where you can go follow him on all the socials and subscribe to the Third Apron. Yossi, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Getting ready for Vegas. I'll be there tomorrow for a whole week. Other than that, pretty good.
How long do you try and last in Vegas for Summer League? Are you someone who's there for like over a week?
I'm like Summer League aside, I live in LA, so I've been to Vegas. I can't countless of times. Nowadays, I don't like to do more than 2 nights. So, yeah, we'll see how this would be a new PR for me.
I feel that in my bones. I don't know, like 3 nights in Vegas feels like the max for me. The people who go there for the entire summer league, I think they shave years off their life would be my guess if they're staying there the entire 2 weeks or whatever it ends up being.
I think you gotta enjoy the extracurriculars there. Like I don't like to gamble. Don't really care for the nightlife, so it's like just strictly business.
All right, so you have about 40 minutes here. So as we get started, I wanted to. This is the question that's been just. It's not bugging at me, but the one that I've thought the most about is NBA free agency going to make a comeback at any point in the sense of where we see bigger names change teams more frequently? Or is, and I'm just looking at the Heat, the Wizards, the Lakers, the Clippers seeming to have these like 2026 or more so 2027 cap space plans. Is that just about prioritizing flexibility in general for other stuff they could do? Or do you see free agency becoming at any point more of what it used to be like, I guess, a half decade or so ago now?
I think it'll make occasional comebacks. I just can't say when. I think teams are eventually going to start to push back on extending players all the time, where after COVID, the salary cap froze, so players can then make as much money in an extension than free agency for the time being. And now they changed the rules where you can get more in an extension. So on one hand, you would think, okay, well, now players are never going to hit free agency. If they could just secure the money now, why not do that? And that's been the trend. But the flip side of that is that eventually I think teams will start to get a little more burned on these extensions, because extensions are riskier for the team. When you're a player, you're securing some money now. In the end, they're usually more favorable to the player, I think, because the team has to make a bet years in advance that this player is going to maintain a certain level of production in the future. Where when you get the free agency, you're literally at the final end of that player's, you've made it through the very end of that player's evaluation window, where you have a better chance of giving him a more favorable deal. I think we're still seeing a lot of questionable contracts, and that's putting it nicely, being put out, like Devin Booker. I don't understand the rush to do it. I don't have a problem with like him getting the max. It's just he has 3 years left on his contract. He just started this contract that he's currently on. Why? What is the rush? What are you getting ahead of by giving him max dollars 3 years in advance for his age 32 and 33 season? Why not wait like 2 more years at least before you consider extending him? See how he holds up. And then on the other side, you got like Herb Jones. He just signed his extension. I think there's some good arguments that he probably left some money on the table.
Yeah.
But still, like, he signed this 2 years in advance. So maybe Herb and his camp feel like, well, maybe the offense isn't ever really going to come around to the point where he's going to get anything close to like the Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby type money. Or maybe they have an indication that cap space won't be available enough for them for where a team might like spend a lot more money. So he maybe sacrificed some money, but I don't know. I don't know how much. Like, I think there's a good case that he secured some money now, but like probably would have risked not making too much more. So yeah, back to your question. I think teams just eventually need to realize that two things need to happen. One, that these extensions are just not that great for them, and that they should try letting more players hit the open market to get a better value. But then also, I think things need to align where potentially 2027 might be a cap space year because Giannis could opt out. Jokic would technically expire if he doesn't extend by then. So that also needs to happen. But we'll see if that aligns for 2027. If not, maybe another year.
When you're talking about the extensions of like a Herb Jones type player specifically, do you think that him and his camp does it are they looking at what this summer's market maybe was and seeing how few teams have had cap space and maybe how little actions happened in free agency over the recent past and saying, well, that's why we want to lock in these longer term dollars now? And like they do have the flexibility, that player option for him. But it seems like at one point it felt like it was like kind of the stars that were just signing these extensions because they're capped at what they can make anyway and they could force trades. But now it feels like it's becoming a little more commonplace to extend the non stars. And I'm just wondering if I looked at Herb Jones's deal was like, yeah, he left money on the table. Like that's someone who in free agency I would expect just his archetype of player teams would always be interested in 2 years down the line. Do you think that maybe that or even just the lower cap increase forecast where it went from 10% to now it's 7% in 26 27? I know a lot of people are now basing a lot of what they're doing off that 7%. Does that change the way that players, like maybe the non-stars, are operating when it comes to their financial security?
Yeah, that's another factor that could be motivating players to extend now. Like I said, if the earlier a player extends, usually the more favorable for the player because like they're just locking in money now without really having to show if they're going to hold it up in like a year for at least another year or two. Um, with Herb, I maybe could the cap space now rising could play into it because in a sense, if he gets one, if the cap doesn't go up and he kind of stagnates or no guarantee that extension is still on the table, I think it probably is. But then if the cap stagnates as well, then there's less of a chance that there might even be caps like enough cap space teams when by the time he's set to hit the open market. So I think they're looking at a lot of things, but maybe also he and his camp have an idea of like, hey, like maybe you're not going to be you're not going to be the kind of player who develops enough offensively where you're going to get like OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges type money. Maybe you could get closer to Jaden McDaniels money as a free agent, but that's not too much more than what this extension is. So in this case, like it's understandable to lock this up now.
Do you look at any of the teams that I think have been mentioned the most, or maybe there's one that you've just seen their cap sheet and are kind of monitoring as, oh, they're kind of really banking on year X free agency class doing something for them? Or is it like when you're talking about the Lakers or the Clippers, is it more about that flexibility or maybe that, you look at their timeline, the Clippers, it's just that everybody's getting older. That's a good time for maybe a reset. But is there any team that kind of stands out as they seem to be investing a lot in like free agency becoming a thing again, or that cap flexibility maybe getting them more than we've seen in years past?
I haven't looked too deeply, but definitely Lakers and Clippers are trying to position themselves for cap space. It seems like the Clippers definitely for next year, they're gonna have max cap space next year. Only like Luca and De'Aaron Fox, if they don't extend, would probably be the top free agents. Maybe Trae Young. We'll see who becomes available. The Lakers 2027 sounds like they're trying to get Giannis. So it just we haven't seen this kind of alignment since 2019 for particular stars, and a lot of it depends on these players not signing any extensions ahead of time, which hasn't been the trend. So and ultimately, I think these teams could only get these stars with like the player kind of like facilitating stuff now, where De'Aaron Fox essentially let the Kings know, hey, I'm not extending, and if I'm a free agent in 2026, I'm going to sign with the Spurs. Trade
Mm-hmm.
me there now. I feel like nowadays some of that might be necessary because teams ideally would like to get ahead of their player hitting free agency and get something for him if he's going to leave.
Does it also have more to do about, as I'm listing those teams, like three of them, Miami, and they did eat into their projected cap space a little bit by giving Davion Mitchell 2 guaranteed years, but Miami, Los Angeles, is this still more of like a market thing where it's like, oh, you're not going to see like they're not on the horizon, but like Washington, like, they're not going into this thinking, oh, like maybe we could poach LeBron James next summer now that he's going to be a free agent. So a lot of it's still just these are the teams that if anyone's going to benefit from like having this flexibility, it's going to be these types of markets that can bank on those types of transactions.
Yeah, Lakers, Clippers, Heat historically have benefited from having from like chase they've successfully chased stars with cap space where teams like the Wizards, there's just their books are just lining up. I don't think they really care about having cap space next year. If anything, they might end up doing trades where like they have big expirings like Middleton, McCollum, Smart. I wouldn't be surprised if they traded them for players that are going to be under contract next year. And I think they'll probably still have cap space, but I think it's just more a coincidence that they have all these expiring contracts. I think they'll try to be proactive now to get as much value, as much picks as they can between now and through next free agency.
Maybe this is only a question that I have, and we've talked about on this podcast a little bit. Do we read anything into the situation with Damian Lillard where he gets waived in stretch? I know Giannis is a special case, but now we're seeing potentially something similar with Bradley Beal if he gets a buyout and then gets waived in stretch. Could that become more of a trend where teams are more comfortable just having these massive amounts of dead cap hits on their books, or is this sort of going to be a relic of we're at the beginning of this era of aprons and teams are now recalibrating in the face of that, and they'll reorient their books for the longer term more cleanly after this?
I think it's mostly a result of, like, for the Suns, for example, just bad management and trading all their draft picks, not having anything left to trade, already having too much money, too many bad contracts, not being able to move off those. So if they do it with Beal, that's mostly a result. Same thing with the Bucks. I don't think a lot. They've been very leveraged, trading almost all their picks throughout the years. They've had a lot of bad money. Now, like, their books got cleaner, and then this opportunity for Miles Turner came along, which I don't think he's good enough where it's worth doing this, but they did it anyway. So I think it's mostly a result of a combination of uh, not having any assets to trade and having a lot of bad money. So when I look around the league, like, well, who's a team that could potentially be in this situation next? Maybe the Sixers. They have Embiid with 4 years left on his contract, Paul George with 3 years left on his contract. They're making max money. Like, odds are one of these guys are just not going to work out. At least one of these guys are not going to work out. So what if in a year from now they miss the playoffs again? They decide it's over. You're probably not going to get the flexibility by trading both those guys. You might have to consider stretching one of those guys. So now that we're seeing the Bucks and potentially the Suns test the fullest limits of the stretch provision, which has never been done quite at this level, maybe we'll probably start to see more teams do it, but they have to have those deadly combinations.
As someone who's so into the weeds from a cap perspective, when you look at the Giannis situation, where it seems similar to they're not as well positioned as Oklahoma City with Kevin Durant, but OKC followed his tenure until the end. They said until the wheels fall off, like if he leaves, he leaves. Do you like? I understand why the Bucks are going that route, and I've said just given their assets right now, I can't imagine trading Giannis unless he pushes for it, because otherwise, what's the point? Where do you land on that whole type of discussion, knowing, okay, now they've done this to get Miles Turner? When you look at just they don't control their own first until 2031, just from that front office perspective, how do you view that type of? It feels like they're delaying the inevitable situation, basically.
It's tough because you can't just trade Giannis. We've seen what happened when the Mavs, for example, traded their franchise player. Now, I do think it's a little different because there was no warning. Like, there was no rumors that Luka might be available. Mavs fans didn't have time to even like mentally divorce, if that makes sense. Where like Bucks fans have been going through this for so long that if Giannis finally requested a trade, like, they'd understand. There wouldn't be some sudden rug pull. But yeah, you still need to, for like the sake of just future moves, having goodwill with the stars, showing other stars how you treat them to attract potentially more in the future. Yeah, you can't just trade Giannis. I'd be very curious to know like what exactly ownership values, because for them to approve this stretch and then sign Miles Turner feels like they value keeping Giannis for as long as possible, and they don't necessarily care too much about how the highest, like what are the highest end outcomes. Maybe they, in their view, this is a championship contender. Well, I disagree. So that's what it seems like. They ultimately, as long as Giannis wants to be there, they're going to ride it out. Um, Maybe there's people in management who deep down would just already want to trade Giannis and get as much value as possible before it's too late. But it's a very delicate situation. But I do think if ultimately they wanted to move on, they could communicate that in a way that would be fine and not ruffle any feathers.
What have you made of how the aprons being intact have affected just the way that teams transact? I've seen a lot of ex players have been hurt by this, whether it's role players, mid end players, and a bench players. I've seen it does feel like it's made the trade market wonky because everyone's trying to figure out like, well, how do we not take back more money than we send out? Because if we're trying to be good, we don't want to be hard capped necessarily at the first apron. Do you see like of the main criticisms that are out there, is there one that you think is legitimate, or is there fallacies out there that we need to sort of course correct on, or is there even anything flying under the radar in terms of how the way that the CBA is set up has impacted the way that teams are transacting now?
It's definitely a lot. There's a lot more restrictions now, but I think the term second apron just become this buzzword where people just like to say it without really fully understanding what it means. Where being above the second apron isn't necessarily something that its penalties alone is going to cripple a team. It's more so the maybe like the new tax system, which no one ever wants to talk about, that now it's even more expensive the deeper you go. So technically, if you are in the second apron, that means you're really deep in the tax, which means you've hit a bunch of multipliers with your tax payments. And that's like something that might be potentially uh, getting teams who used to spend so much money, like the Clippers, Nets, Warriors, maybe thinking, maybe having second thoughts about how deep they want to go. But they mostly just add restrictions to how you're building the team. So I think with all these restrictions being implemented, we are seeing teams kind of resetting their books, taking a step back, but then eventually being in position to spend a lot of money for a certain amount of time, like the Thunder are about to. I think they'll continue with most of this team for like the end of the decade. I think they're positioned to do that. Ownership shown a willingness to spend. They have all the enough draft picks to start replacing players at the bottom. Like if they want to try to avoid the second apron one of these years, it's not gonna be by trading their top three guys. They're gonna start at the bottom. They're gonna start with like Wiggins and Joe. Maybe they draft their replacements. Eventually got to pay Case on Wallace. Okay, well, trade Alex Caruso. So they've got other ways to balance all this. I think a lot of what we're seeing with some players not getting as much money as they maybe deserve. I just think this is mostly a result of bad decisions from teams in the past 5 years, like too many extensions, too many players, like, and then too many like undeserving max extensions, guys like Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal. I think that these guys eating up a bunch of a team's cap is probably taking away money over these past few years from certain players. I think there's also there's a bunch of things like, but I think it's mostly from just decisions that have already been made that's leading up to this now, like, and then there's like market forces that are not exactly under the NBA's control. The salary cap only went up 3% last year. That's going to impact the market, but it'll impact players more so when their teams have been on a spending spree, just extending players, signing certain players to maxes that probably don't deserve it. And and then what else? There's one other thing. Then, like, guards, for example, the most oversaturated position. Most teams are set at guard. I think that's what's playing into guys like Norman Powell. The Heat were able to get him for just Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love. The Clippers had to trade a second round pick with
Yeah,
Powell
that
to
was
get
weird.
John Collins. The Jazz had to trade Colin Sexton with a second round pick to get Yusuf Nurkic. So the positional scarcity, that's another thing, but it's mostly impacting guards right now. And there's like a pretty decent amount of NBA like talented guards who are available right now. Will probably just get the minimum.
My favorite, because you mentioned the Colin Sexton trade, my favorite NBA conspiracy theory that I've now heard a bunch is that the Jazz made that trade with the Hornets to prevent them from trading down so that Utah could still get Ace Bailey because Washington would have wanted to trade up to get him. I hope that's true because it feels like a very well thought out conspiracy
I
theory.
think wasn't that after the draft?
Well, it could have been in place. Like I'm sure teams, I know they never
Oh,
talk about deals that get
yeah.
pushed through afterwards, but do you think that we've already kind of seen the limit of how long teams will spend time in the second apron just because even throw the tax penalties out the window, just the idea of like your draft pick getting frozen and then the penalties that like getting moved to the end of the round after that. I thought the Celtics were going to be sort of our test for well, how long are teams willing to go into the second apron and stay there? But then now they get out of it. I don't know if they would have stayed in it because of the Tatum injury. It sound Brad Stevens made it seem like they wouldn't have. But do you think we've already kind of seen the limits of how long teams would be willing to spend there, or is there another team you look at and say, well, maybe they'll be the limit, or it's just we don't know yet?
I think it's too early to tell, but based on how those frozen draft pick things work, it's basically there's two things that can influence that. The frozen draft pick versus, and then eventually once you're in the second apron long enough, then you get the first round pick dropping to the end of the first round. But then also there's entering the repeater tax, where once you're in the repeater tax and 3 of your previous 4 seasons, you pay the higher rates. So those kind of coincide because, yeah, basically, I believe also when you're in the repeater tax for 3 and 4 seasons, then the first pick that got frozen, that eventually drops to the end of the first round. So there's a way to time how you go about the second apron where you kind of like the Thunder. I think so they'll be under the tax this year. Right now, based on how things are looking, they're projected to be over the second apron for 26-27, but they could figure out a way to get below it. There's a lot of yesterday when the extensions were announced for Chet and Jalen, there were a lot of discussion in my mentions on how people think the Thunder are going to go about getting below it. Like a lot of people think they'll just let Isaiah Hardenstein go. A lot of people think they might let Lou Dort go. I don't necessarily see it quite that. I would guess they start even further at the bottom because if the Thunder repeat again, I think they're going to want to keep Dort and Hardenstein. Maybe you trade Caruso because then you got to, like I mentioned earlier, Kason Wallace. It's time to pay him. Maybe you trade Wiggins and Jay Will by then. I'm sorry, no, Joe and Wiggins by then. So then maybe you've drafted their replacements. Like maybe AJ Mitchell he might even be ready to take over for Joe's role this year. Honestly, that could make trading. So, yeah, I think they'll try to stay below second apron one more year, and then after that, maybe you just because then SGA's extension will kick in. There's not going to be any avoiding the second apron. So 27, 28, and 28, 29, I would guess they just spend as much as possible to get over the second apron. After that, okay, maybe they consider taking a step back, resetting their books a bit. But keep in mind, the Thunder have all the draft picks. There's a case that
All of
they're
them.
immune to those draft pick penalties. What's a first round pick in 2036 dropping to the end of the first round? How much does that hurt them when they still have at least 2 draft picks in every single draft? So that's
That's
the
where it's
thing. The Thunder might be like very uniquely positioned to not to just blow over the second apron for as long as they want.
That's where Sam Presti's tendency to trade those picks like for more distant picks and continuing maybe making that trend to where it says you're mentioning like if a pick gets frozen out in 2036, like they just might have a way to have acquired a pick in that draft already that has higher value than their own pick. And so that's where what they've done, it's not just accumulating the assets, but their ability to kind of maintain the flexibility of turning them into different kinds of assets where like getting creative about like they actually traded away a first round pick to get what could be a higher value swap. That might be why they're set up to. And so I like that because I saw a lot of, oh, this is like a 1 or 2 year thing for them, and then they're going to have to blow it up. And I'll never rule anything out because the NBA, like, the NBA windows are just fleeting now, even when you think they're not. Like, they're just fleeting for some reason. But they more so than any other team, it's like, I don't know, like the next 3 or 4 years, like this just might be like their core just might be already in place. And not only are they prepared to pay for it, but they're built to kind of weather any of the, at least like the functional penalties. We could talk whether their ownership wants to pay deep into the tax is a different story, but they're definitely built to kind of navigate all those transactional and functional limitations that come with being in the second apron.
Yeah, and that secondary draft pick market, yeah, they're always trying to get the best value picks, like project what draft picks from other teams they think could be something that hits. Because they've done really well getting draft picks this day. They had a pick from the Heat that was almost a lottery pick, and next year, what do they have? A Sixers pick? Maybe that's like middle of the first round. So every year they just have like a pretty nice pick on their hands, and maybe like for example, they have a Nuggets pick in 2027, I believe.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
have one of theirs in
uh,
2029 too. The Nuggets, I feel like, just
yeah.
gave them picks like candy. Yeah.
So maybe now you're thinking, well, maybe we can figure out a way to start doing something with those. Maybe get different picks because the Nuggets, they went ahead and swapped Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson, which saves a lot of money, and that can buy a couple more years because that can let them have a deeper team. So when you factor in things like that, they're always going to be Thunder are always going to be proactive, trying to not just have as many picks as possible, but try to have the best, most valuable picks they possibly could.
This could somewhat apply to the Thunder moving forward, but you also kind of mentioned this before. Do you think that, especially when you were mentioning some of these holdover deals, like Zach LaVine's contract, I think is the one that people point towards the most. Do you see a trend where the bar for getting a max contract, whether it's coming off your rookie deal or I was looking at Jaren Jackson Jr. as kind of the case study this year. As I'm really interested to see if he, in the renegotiate and extend, if he gets at or near the max of what he could have gotten in free agency. He basically did. So now I'm kind of looking at the Trae Young extension eligibility to where it's do they not sign him to one? Does he get less than the max? But do you see like maybe in another world or a few years down the line, Chet Holmgren wouldn't have been a no-brainer max extension candidate, but just knowing what the second apron, and again, for me, it's those tax penalties you mentioned, like, yeah, those are huge for ownership, but for me, it's more about the functional limitations that comes with being in the second apron for so long. Do you think we reach a point, or are we getting there, where the bar to get a max contract is just higher than it is right now?
So I think now with those restrictions, it's going to force teams to negotiate a little more. I don't think anybody really expects Trae Young to get a full max contract, maybe just something a little bit less. I don't know exactly what that might entail, but yeah, I think they're going to maybe instead of giving him like 60 million a year, maybe try to get him at like maybe it's 50 million a year. Um, so and then with Jaren, they have the cap space right now where they could renegotiate him, where they're going to give him less. It's not like a full max deal. What they're going to probably do is get his first 2 years at the max, and then they'll have paid it forward, where the last 3 years are like a little bit below the max, gives them a little bit more flexibility. That's what the Jazz did with Markkanen last year. So yeah, I think it's a little different with rookie extensions where with guys like Chet and Jalen Williams, there are people who think that's a lot of money for those guys. But like the question is, if those guys hit free agency, are they going to get max offer sheets? Yeah. So that's why that's why OKC gave them max contracts now. But also it's all about the percentage of the cap where they're only making 25% of the cap. They might make a little more if they get all NBA stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But even still, like 25% of the cap is like when you think about it in terms of percentages, that's really not that much for a guy for those guys. Like it's possible that they're worth more if they were able to get more. Once you get like above 30%, closer to 35, that's where it starts to get a lot more burdensome for the teams. Where if the contract doesn't work, then it could really burn the team. Like Bradley Beal making 35% of the cap, Zach LaVine making 35% of the cap, uh, Devin Booker may potentially in a couple of years still making 35% of the cap. We'll see if he's still a 35% player by then. So, um, yeah, I just think as far as like the higher ends of once you get like past 30%, teams are definitely going to start pushing back on that.
I used to dismiss this take as mostly fan speak, but now I've seen just a lot of people I respect kind of throw it out there as hypothetical. Do you think the money, when we look at things in terms of percentage of the salary cap now, which I think is smart, but when you see the raw dollar amounts, like they're getting, like just on paper, they look so ridiculous. Do you think we ever reach a point where you're seeing like, it's not someone who's in their age 40 season taking less than they could get, but where we see someone who's maybe closer inside of their prime to either take less to help a team, like noticeably less to help a team sustain, just because it is still so much money, or maybe to forge like a different type of powerhouse if they're looking to leave? Or do you think that this is always going to be just sort of money is kind of the barometer for, okay, like this is where I am in the place of this league, and so will always be a priority by and large to get as much as possible?
I think we are seeing some cases, not too many, where players are willing to take a little less than what they probably could. We just saw it last year with Jalen Brunson, where him taking 4 for 160 was considered a huge underpay. If he hit free agency this summer, he'd get the max for sure. Like the Knicks would have had to give it to him. Um, so I think even though the caps, the percentages of the maxes are still the same, uh, the money still is the raw dollars is growing up to a point where some players are willing to where a lot of players max extensions amounts are like high enough that it's like it's good enough. It's high enough for them to accept it. It's still a lot of money these players are making.
This is also maybe only a question that I have. How do you think front offices view when it comes to like the acquisition of distant draft picks, to where, okay, the Nuggets sending out the 2032 first rounder to get off of Michael Porter Jr.'s money and bringing in Cam Johnson? I always look at those as crown jewels, especially when it seems like a team's maxed out of their assets, and by that point, Nikola Jokic can be like age 37 or whatever it is. But I think you could also make the argument that a lot of these front office executives would look at that pick and say, well, I'm not going to be the one either trading it or making it. And so is there like a discrepancy between how those like ultra distant first round picks are valued around the league, do you think?
I feel like for the most part, they're kind of just the values just in the time. So in ways, they're all valued the same. Like I don't see how you can really measure how a Nuggets 2032 pick is any different from like a Hornets 2032 pick right now. Like other than having Jokic, uh, but for the most part, when you're comparing like any team with each other, you really can't project like what it is. You could only so all you could do is get the pick, and you have so much time to figure out what to do with it. Keep it, trade it for something else. Um, so I think we've just seen teams, for the most part, they've done okay. Where when you're a team like Denver, Milwaukee, who has a uh, a generational player who's going to be playing for a long time, when you're trading picks very far out, as long as you have that player, then those picks, then you should be in a decent position to not have the worst case scenario. Where when you're like Brooklyn in 2013, they traded 3 first round picks for 2 very aging vets. And then the Suns, I think, did an equally destructive trade, trading for Kevin Durant at age 35, it was. And then
One of the
trading.
worst trade negotiations I've ever seen from a team where they were the only team you wanted to go to, and they just like it harkened back to what the Knicks did with Melo. It felt like just kept giving Brooklyn stuff.
Yeah. So, and then the Suns followed that up by trading everything else they had for Beal on a really bad contract. So we've seen, so we're seeing teams like the Wolves, the Cavs that have done their trades for Gobert and Mitchell. It looks like those have already paid off for them. And like just seeing where things are because they have Edwards, because the Cavs have all their young talent, like it's there's not going to be any like worst case scenario at the level of the Nets or the Suns. Um, we'll see what happens with the Magic, but same thing. It's like they have two young all-star level guys. They have a really nice young team. So I just feel like for the most part, as long as you do have a young cornerstone that you could look to by the end of that last pick obligation, it'll work out, though it does limit how much you can do to build the team going forward. We've seen like all these teams that I just mentioned. Once you make that trade, that's like you're kind of out of moves to make. So that's like the bigger thing you're losing. Like the Knicks, not too much else they could do now. Like, yeah, they have a great team right now. They have a championship contender, but they literally don't have any first round picks to trade. Like all they could do is, get some really good free agent signings and, see what happens. Maybe they have to trade some of their guys later, but without those picks, it's very hard to make any deal.
A couple quick ones for you since we only have you for a few more minutes. Do you look at any teams around the league right now and say like, okay, like their business, like on a pretty, like a maybe a massive scale, unless it is a massive scale, but you look at them and say, oh, like, no, they got some stuff to still figure out for this offseason specifically.
Yeah, there's a bunch. The Nets, obviously, they still have like up to 30 million in cap space, something like that. They could get up to that amount. So are they gonna? They've been able to get 2 first-round picks with their cap space by taking on Terrence Mann and taking on Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson. Is there something else they can do? The Raptors, I think they're gonna trade RJ Barrett. They need to save some money. That just not that the fit doesn't make sense. They tried to trade him for Ingram at the trade deadline, but the Pelicans didn't want him. Is there a trade where they can say, because right now they're over the tax in first apron? Is there a trade that gets them below it and maybe gets them like a point guard or a backup center? The Kings are probably going to do something, whether that's Kaminga.
That should terrify their fans. The Kings are going to do something.
Yeah,
That's a red flag.
they're going to do something, I think. The Suns, we're just waiting to see if they end up stretching Beal and if they end up doing anything with that added flexibility, because then they're below the aprons. They could use them at level if they want. The Sixers, anyone who's with a restricted free agent, the Sixers, Bulls, Warriors. Are they going to find a suitable sign and trade for Kaminga to fill up their roster? They have done nothing yet. How much of their flexibility do they want to use? My feeling is they're going to try to just use the tax mid-level on Horford, so they can go above the first apron, try to get a guy like Melton on the minimum so they can try to spend more money to fill up the roster. What is Memphis going to do to create the cap space needed to officially renegotiate Jaren Jackson Jr.? Based on Sham's reporting, sounds like something will happen with Cole Anthony, whether that's a trade or a buyout or something.
Yeah, that just kind of that happened at the very early on in the process, and it's just like we haven't heard anything about it since.
Yeah, they haven't done anything, so we're still waiting to see what, do the Clippers end up getting Beal and Chris Paul? That feels like that's going to happen. And I don't think this is probably nothing will come out of this, but is there something to the LeBron situation? Is that something where it looks like LeBron's not going to be a Laker after this year, potentially? Maybe is there an early exit perhaps between these two teams? Yeah, that's the other thing.
Are there any other like emerging trends or questions that you're monitoring, or if when you're doing podcasts like these that you wish people would ask you and that they don't, that you're just kind of clocking moving forward about the way the NBA kind of transacts now?
I mean, I think we mentioned them, whether that's potentially more teams doing stretches and holding teams holding a harder line on 30% plus max extensions. I feel like we're starting this. I think we've discussed a good amount of them.
Yossi, this was great. Are you just able to tell our listeners, subscribers, watchers where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
Yeah, I've got my podcast, Third Apron, which you can find on YouTube, anywhere where you get your podcast, and the newsletter with the same name on Substack. A lot of deeper salary cap analysis. You can see all my salary cap information for each team on capsheets.com. And make sure you are subscribed to me on Twitter and Blue Sky on my name. I have instant salary cap analysis as soon as any transaction happens.
I just want to echo the work you do is great. For everyone listening, the links will be when I put this out. It'll be in the podcast and YouTube descriptions to where you can find and support him. And thank you so much for giving me a ton of your time during one of the busiest times of the year for you. I really appreciate it. And rest assured, I'll probably be pestering you again in the future.
No, you're welcome, Dan. Thanks for having me on.